who's responsible for the fantastic speaker program. He finds them and invites them to speak. So Andy has been organising the symposium for many years. He started off really very much focused on crop circles, but over the years he's got more and more focused on what we call the Truth Agenda. And 4 years ago, his book, The Truth Agenda, came out, and it was fantastic because that's what I read during my summer holidays. And this year, I'm looking forward to reading his new book, Conspiracies. Now, last year was 2012, and we were all wondering what on earth is going to happen. And now we're exploring, well, what is happening? And the title of the symposium this year on the program says Into the New Era. And that is what Andy's going to be looking at this morning, exploring the new era. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a really big warm welcome to Andy Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Well, it is indeed the new era. Here we are. All this talk for all these years about ancient cycles and global change and consciousness shift. And here we are. We're in the new era. It seems unbelievable, doesn't it? And what I want to do is to explore what this means for us. Where are we going with this? What do we mean by the new era? And how many of the things that mattered until 21st of December last year still matter? What can we throw away? What was rubbish? What was nonsense? And what still has validity today? So I want to explain really that there is still cause to be taking seriously this notion of cycles, because just because we got past 21st of December 2012 doesn't mean that we don't need to still be concerned with what the wider issues around all of that were. So I thought I'd begin by going back in time, actually. Back in time to the year 999, because, as some of you will remember, there was a lot of fuss back then about the turning of the era into the year 1000. Now, we are a species fascinated by big numbers. We just love them. So when you get to a big number, of course, the idea that something big and spectacular won't happen seems ridiculous. And, of course, in these days, what people were waiting for was the day of judgment, the second coming, the return of Christ. And not much has really changed. There's still people waiting for that today. And there were signs and symbols and, two-headed calves being born. That was a sign. Mutated children. That was a sign. Rains of blood, whatever they were. It was all taken as a sign that clearly it was the big year. Here we were, the end of time. Well, of course, nothing happened as such. And so then there was a certain amount of consternation. And so then, of course, instead of just saying maybe we were wrong and there's nothing more to think about, everybody thought, well, it must be the year 2000 instead. So 1,000 years on, virtually nothing had changed in our mindset at all. So now it's going to be the millennium. And as the fireworks burst forth across the zones on the day of the millennium, of course, there was a lot of expectation. You had the religious sort of undercurrent of still waiting for the return of the Christ in some form or another. But as some of you will recall, the other big thing that people were very concerned about was that maybe this really was the end of civilization as we knew it, because of the good old millennium bug. Remember the millennium bug? Well, you might want to remember it, because the interesting thing is this is not an issue that's necessarily gone away, as I will explain a little bit later on. But nonetheless, there was a lot of concern because computers only recorded a year with 2 digits. And then suddenly it occurred to everybody, what happens when it all clicks over into 2000? Are the computers going to think we've gone back to 1900 and then just promptly shut down? Because it doesn't make sense. So there was a lot of worry about what would occur. Now, there are 2 schools of thought. One is that the whole thing was an unnecessary scare, even a scam. But there's another school of thought that says that had all the computer programmers not done the work that they did do to upgrade the systems, there would have been big problems. And indeed, on the night, there was apparently a lot of problem, particularly with shipping, but they just kept it out of the news. And in the event, planes didn't plummet from the sky. We didn't all die in some horrible holocaust of rioting. But you can see that this mindset is something that's very strong in humanity. The expectation of apocalypse is something we almost seem to need. It's something very inherent, very deep within us. And so, of course, when nothing happened as such, and there we all were clearing up afterwards, after the big celebrations, there was still a feeling of, well, is that really it? Is that all it was about? And of course, that's really, I think, when we began to see more focus going on to the 2012 prophecies. And there had been some awareness already of it, of course, by then. But then it was as if something felt incomplete, a feeling that something was still coming up. And so it turned into the speculation around 2012. Now, the end of the world in 2012. The end of the world, there is one phrase which it's mentioned in one of the Mayan prophecies, okay, but it's all very vague, and that could mean many, many things. As we have explored here many times before, the serious scholars of all of this never really believed it was the end of the world. And I'm not going to go back through all of this. Suffice to say, there is an ancient cycle of 5,125 years, which seems to be based on astronomical observations. It clearly mattered to the ancients. They thought whenever this cycle ended and began again, there would be a huge shift. It was the beginning, in fact, of a time of change. And it was the media that pushed this end of the world thing. And the media, of course, love to build something up so they can then knock it down again. So they were all able to have a great big laugh when we got to 22nd of December last year, and they could say, there you go, everybody was completely bonkers. We always knew nothing was going to happen. But they were really debunking their own myths that they had spread. So the good news is, keep calm, because the world didn't end. Well, at least not just yet. Because you see, this is the thing. The notion that we can now forget all about the prophecies and all the speculation that has surrounded this, I think is misjudged. Because it was always about the beginning of a period of change. The Mayans called it Creation Day. It wasn't Death Day. It was the beginning of a period of shift. So therefore, I sense very much in the alternative world a kind of a letting go of the baton. It's like, oh, well, yeah, that all came to nothing. Disappointment. But did it? Did it come to nothing? Or, in fact, are the issues as relevant, if not more relevant now than ever they were? And I think the problem we had was that so many people got hooked up on the one day, 21st of December 2012, which was, the switchover of the cycle. And I think that really is what threw people because, of course, nobody really thought everything was going to happen just on one day. And, as you will know, there was a lot of speculation about what could happen even before the big day. A year ago, there was great speculation about the Olympics. Was something disastrous going to happen? Was there going to be an atomic explosion or a false flag terrorist attack, even a fake alien invasion? There was a lot of concern. Now, I think there are people here today who lived in London who actually decided to move out of London during the Olympics just in case something terrible happened. And when nothing terrible did happen, okay, and we got past the Olympics, there was suddenly a feeling of almost of resentment from some quarters. And those people that had been discussing the potential dangers of what might be coming up came in for quite a lot of nasty attack. But I think you've got to look at this, I think, in a broader way, because A, I don't think anybody ever said something definitely would happen. B, I think there was always the risk that, the world focusing on the Olympics in the year, which was at the gateway to the new era, I think it was a risk. I mean, we have a problem. in the alternative world. And it goes back again to that feeling of the need for apocalypse. And when something didn't happen, there was, I think, almost disappointment in some people, particularly in the ones who didn't live in London, okay? And I think we need to be quite careful about this, because why be disappointed that thousands didn't die in a terrible explosion or whatever it might have been? Being kind, I would say this. I think the problem we have is that in the conspiracy truth-seeking community, people are always looking for validation. That's reasonable. It's always attacked and vilified in the media. So people actually want to show that a prediction came true, that they were right. And I think part of the disappointment was as much around that as, not really wanting people to die. But I think the other thing we need to bear in mind is, and this was said at the time, that there was a lot of feeling that if we all talk up the potential dangers of what might happen, well, maybe they won't happen. Because maybe it would be too obvious for some dark authorities to pull off a stunt, because then thousands of people could say, well, we knew that's what you were going to do, and you can read it on this web page here. So you could argue that the fact that nothing happened, in fact, far from being a disappointment, was a happy victory for the alternative speculators. I would say that's a healthier way to look at it. And if you really think that something should have happened, I think you need to look very deeply inside your souls as to why you wanted that to occur. So, I would argue that, let's not be hard on certain aspects of the truth-seeking world. If you're trying to expose things like this, if you're coming from the right place, it's because you don't want them to happen, or you don't want them to happen again. So these things are important to discuss. But a few months after all that, of course, came the big day, 21st of December 2012. And this is where a few of us were. This is a place in Sussex known as Sisbury Ring. It's a very famous ancient hill fort. And it's a place where some of us who live over in Sussex Way for years have done a lot of work with crop circles and psychic channeling and all of this. And our dear old friend Paul Bura, who sadly passed away this year, and I pay tribute to him, and we will later in the weekend as well. We did a lot of work with him, and Sisbury was a very crucial place to that. So we thought, where are we going to be? People kept asking. Did you get asked as well? Where are you going to be on 21st of December 2012? And we ummed and ahed. Did we go to Avebury? Did we go to the obvious places? Did we get on a plane and fly to Chichen Itza? But we thought, no, this is our place. This is where we are the guardians of, if you like. We need to be home. And indeed, we've been up there for the near solar total eclipse of 1999, for instance. And so we thought this is the place to be. So here we are. Here's footage of us heading up onto Sisbury Ring. You may recognize some of these people, or their backs anyway. There's Mr. Marcus Allen in the middle there. And there's a group of us there, and you'll recognize some of the faces. Marcus is taking the picture, in fact. So, but why I want to share this with you is this. We had a little lesson on that day that maybe the new era was not just about easy, instant enlightenment, as we knew really it wouldn't be, but we were faced almost immediately with a dilemma. And it was a difficult one, and let me explain. So we gathered at the big moment, 11:11 a.m., that incredible mystical time that it just so happened that was the exact time of the winter solstice. Wasn't that amazing? When you're up on Sisbury Ring, though, you really feel like you're on top of the world. You can virtually get a 360-degree view of the landscape around you. So it seemed like a great place to be. So we were just going to gather and be still and tune in. And as we were preparing to do this, a gentleman walks along. And he's on his own, and he's obviously looking for company, and he knew about the 2012 thing, and he wanted, I think, someone just to commune with. But this caused a bit of a dilemma. And it's interesting because it also revealed a kind of masculine-feminine sort of divide. The women in our group thought we should ask him to join the circle. Whereas the men were more, oh, no, we don't know who he is. And I felt much the same. It's like, well, I don't know what energy this bloke's got. You know, we have a history with this place. We wanted to just be in a safe sort of energy zone and inviting something new and potentially disruptive in. It felt, what do we do? Do we invite this man in? Now, in the end, the masculine vote, would you believe, won. And we didn't invite him in. And we just said, oh, look, sorry, you know, we're a bunch of friends. We're going to do our own thing. But I think we all felt uncomfortable. And we had a bit of angst about this afterwards. And I thought about this myself in the months since and thought, should we have let this man in? Now, I'm not here to do a bit of breastbeating and regret and guilt. It was the way that it was, and we didn't. But it raises a serious point, which is this, that immediately we were faced with having to discern and make a choice. And it made me realize that this new era was immediately beginning with us having to make a moral choice about where we were going. Now, maybe we made the wrong choice, but maybe the lesson isn't wasted. And it's, I think, very, very important that we think about things like this. Because, of course, what many people were hoping for with all the turning of the cycle business was a kind of an instant enlightenment. And we discussed this before in this very room. The notion of ascension, I think on a general level, is real in terms of it anticipates a consciousness shift that certainly if the prophecies are true, it's going to take a while, but it's certainly building, it's begun. But there was a contingent, and I'm sure some of you are here today, that was expecting a day where suddenly something would happen. We'd be zapped with energy, or we'd suddenly be lifted up. We'd feel different. Some were hoping to go into the fifth dimension. Now, it's interesting because there were some people on the day that really took this very literally. One gentleman, for instance, planned to jump off Bell Rock at the exact moment of 11:11. But he wouldn't go splat. He would go into the fifth dimension. Now, as it happens, common sense prevailed. And when it came to it, he didn't. And they just had to tune in like everybody else, which is probably just as well. But you can see, nonetheless, there's the strength of belief. The strength of belief that we were going to just be instantly enlightened and we wouldn't have to do any work. The free lunch of ascension is something that's always troubled me because it doesn't seem real. I do believe there are energies, if you want to call them that, coming in. I do believe there is a new consciousness which is welling up, but it's not going to be instant. I really don't see that. And even if we do suddenly get an energy shift, I still don't believe that the dilemmas and the difficulties that we are faced with are just going to evaporate. That simply isn't the way the world works. So, these, I think, are very important lessons for our time, that what the new era was not about just leaving behind everything that we're built up to and never worrying anymore about all those things that we thought were so important. What it was about us making choices for the future. What kind of new era do we want? If this is, as the ancients thought, the gateway to great change, do we actually take the bull by the horns and make it change as we want? Or do we just let it happen around us? So these are the dilemmas. And many people felt for many years, of course, we were protected. This conference began exploring crop circles, as you know, probably. And this is something that I think was very rooted for many years in a hope that there was a force, an intelligence out there that was going to come down at the crucial moment and save us. And all would be well. And that this was the build-up. These are this year's crop circles, just a handful. And it's been a strange year. Many people wondered, as we built to 2012, whether suddenly the whole thing would fall off the edge of the cliff. And so far, it's certainly been a very slow year for crop circles. Now, this may not be the end, I suspect it isn't, but it seems clear crop circles perhaps go in cycles. Looking back at the historical accounts we've had over the years, there seems to be a background level of crop circles that have always been there. But then suddenly from the 1980s onwards, there was this sudden build-up. So maybe now we're coming down the other side of the curve. But I suspect it will be around for a while yet. But there's no question that there's a feeling that everybody feels in their gut, this has peaked. We're past the peak. And we might still get the odd surprise. But there's a lesson. I think some were hoping that one day we would get a formation, for instance, that was so huge, so undeniable, showing symbolism that enlightened us instantly, that would be the final sort of apogee of the crop circles. But now it seems clear it's not really going to happen like that. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be a mass landing. I don't think there's going to be a ring of formations all the way around Silbury Hill that give the answer. And maybe that was never the idea of the crop circles at all. But I think we can learn some lessons from past formations. And some of you will be familiar with this crop formation here. You've got to look, I think, at what is going on now to see what maybe some of the roots of what this crop circle mystery and all the other consciousness issues that have arisen around it, what it was really about. This appeared in 2002, just outside of Winchester. And it seems to depict, if you can't already see it, an extraterrestrial in the classic shape, holding a wheel of binary code rendered in a form known as ASCII. And this is one of these formations where you're meant to do something with it. You're meant clearly to blur it. And when you blur it, then you see the picture. And it's really rather incredible. It's very three-dimensional, incredible detail here. And nobody's ever really come close to replicating this before or since. But what makes this a special formation to this day, and some people are uncomfortable with the ET imagery, some prefer the more beautiful, sort of generally symbolic ones, but this is different in as much as it's the only one that had a direct message in it. And some will know the message, but if you don't, when you decode the binary code, which is in ASCII, and ASCII can, of course, generate text on a computer, the message that you get is this. It says, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe there is good out there, and we oppose deception. And then it ended by saying, conduit closing. So there we go. It was a warning, but also it offered hope at the same time. Now, there was a lot of debate about this. What did this mean? Was this about beings that looked like this? Was it from beings that looked like this, holding out the disc? Was it about our own governments? Was it about the powers that run the world? I think over the years, the interpretation has certainly gone far more that way. And people today, I think, are beginning to think more about this message and looking at the resonance with what's going on in the times right now. Because the idea of deception is so embedded into the systems that we live in. But look how much is being revealed by the day. Now, the new era seems to me to be a time where that which was hidden and undealt with cannot remain so anymore. It literally is. Every other week, there's another revelation about something that you thought would never come out. Now, we're seeing an example here which merely scratches the surface. Everything from the Hillsborough disaster to the Rupert Murdoch scandal. We had things like the MP's expenses a few years ago, and that really opened the door to people saying, what's really going on? Do these people have our best interests at heart? To which the obvious answer is no, as you probably well know. But it's an interesting time because almost as soon as we got into the new era, there's been a burst of these stories coming out. And more to the point, a feeling even in the general community, not just the alternative community, that maybe it's time to deal with it. Maybe at last we have to seriously look at these issues and make decisions about where we want the world to go. And, one of the big ones that still, I think, puzzle us to know how to really answer it is the imbalance of money. If you want to talk global conspiracy, you have to obviously look at the world of money and banking. And there is no question whatsoever that the obscene amounts of money that the people in the glass towers have really cannot go on like this. But yet they seem to have created a world where it can go on. And we seem to think it's all right. there's something very unhealthy, particularly in our country, going on at the moment, which is that we're all being conditioned and brainwashed to blame those at the bottom for the problems. Yes, there are some benefit cheats. Yes, there are some scroungers. But what we're being told to do at the moment is to brand anybody who needs a little bit of help from the state as a skiver, as a lowlife. While the people up the top who are abusing us daily in much greater ways seem to be getting off essentially scot-free. We are blaming those at the bottom. It is a very, very dangerous state of affairs. And I think we need to be very careful with this. The British welfare state took years to build up. It's something that we're proud of. It's something even that was boasted of in the Olympic ceremony last year. And yet we seem to be dismantling it rapidly. And the conditioning is such that we're going, oh yes, I don't want to give money to those horrible people. Whilst we're still quite happy to just go along with what's going on in these. I mean, we say we're not, but we don't do anything because we have limited options. So we can then turn to those that it's easier to scapegoat and easier to tread underfoot and have a go at them. And it feels like you've made a difference. It's wrong. And I seriously think you need to be ever so careful not to go down that tabloid mentality of blaming the poor for the problems that clearly are caused by the rich. And some of us are somewhere caught in the middle, not knowing quite how to deal with this. It's another big dilemma that the new era has surely got to address. You could argue, why hasn't there been a revolution before now, a serious revolution? Well, the reason is that we're too brainwashed not to do it. And I don't mean violent revolution, so we'll see in a minute. You get very questionable results when you try to do that. So, quick advert. I don't want to go on today much about conspiracies, but I have written a lot about them. So, as Sheila mentioned earlier on, if you want to get to grips with what's really going on, in a book here, we have conspiracies, and there's a new version of the Truth Agenda as well. Because this is a book that I'm pleased to say seems to have had a profound effect on many people. But the world keeps changing annoyingly, so I keep having to update it. So there's a new version with a new chapter and lots of new stuff, because there are new issues for the new era that we need to address. And if you want to look at those, they're out in the stalls room. So, talking of stuff like this, what about what's going on then? Well, the revelations from our friend Edward Snowden, or is he, about the PRISM surveillance system, this is crucial. Because in a way, the revelation that the Americans, in cahoots with GCHQ over here, are monitoring all our emails and communications and phone calls, of course, on one level is not in any way a surprise. It's the kind of thing the conspiracy world has been saying for years. The difference is, finally, it's out in the open. And it's quite clever what's going on. Now, I'm not saying to you Edward Snowden is necessarily working for the other side, which he is being accused of at the moment, in the same way that Julian Assange has been accused of the same thing. But there are slightly odd things. It's possible Snowden is being used, okay? Because as somebody pointed out, I think it was Naomi Wolf, in quite a widespread article that's done the rounds, in a way it suits the powers that be for us to know, really know, that we are under surveillance. Because if you don't, then of course you're going to behave in such a way that you don't feel there's any restrictions on you. The day we all know that actually they're reading, potentially, they haven't got the time and money to read them all, but they could potentially read anything and everything you're saying. Of course, naturally, you go, oh, I better be careful what I say on email then. I won't criticize this political system or whatever. It suits them for that to have come out. Now, if they'd have announced as an official release, oh, by the way, we're monitoring you all, you don't mind, do you? There'd be uproar. Well, now, there has been uproar, but because it's come up seemingly from a whistleblower source, we've all grumbled and moaned, but have you noticed already how quickly it's forgotten? The world's gone, oh, right, oh, well, that's a bit naughty. Anyway, never mind. So there's been a collective shrug, and it's worked. So we have sanctioned that we're all monitored. And basically, we've all said, well, that's a bit much, isn't it? Anyway, and that's what's happened. So it's very clever. So some are saying, there's more to this than meets the eye. And we need, I think, very much to still stand up for our freedoms, because that's the problem. And in another year's time, no one's going to be campaigning about this. You'll just assume, if you didn't already, and I know many of us do, but you'll just assume that they can do what they want. But now they can do what they want, and no one, even in the court of law, is going to challenge it. Because it's all, of course, for our protection. But you could argue that if Snowden's genuine, okay, and let's assume maybe he really has a good, genuine intent. Well, here's a Promethean figure for our times. Here is somebody willing to stick his neck out. And one good sign is that at last, and there's been an absence of people like this for a while, but at last we're beginning to see this. People like Bradley Manning was a good example of somebody willing to literally risk all for the wider good. And more of these people are beginning to arrive. I mean, what can we say, for instance, about Malala? Now, listen, already the conspiracy theories about Malala are beginning. Oh, she's a New World Order operative. She's working for the New World Order. I don't really believe that, because I don't know if you heard her speech at the UN recently. If you haven't, just look it up on YouTube. It's really powerful stuff. And it's not that she is sensationalized in any way at all. If you don't know who this woman is, she was shot in the head by the Taliban, okay, because she was a threat. She was talking about educating women. She spoke out against the Taliban, so they came to take their revenge. Well, unluckily for them, she survived. And not only did she survive, but her resolve survived. And she's saying, well, I'm going to campaign now more than ever I was. I'm going to speak out for women's rights. I'm going to speak out against terrorism, which is ripping apart our corner of the world. We get all worried about terrorism here. It's on their doorstep every day in some countries. And it's at a remove from us, so we don't have to deal with it, but they do. And really check the speech out, because it's incredibly moving, just in somebody standing in her power saying, I will risk all for the wider good. And I think, assuming Malala survives, and let's hope she does, because there's bound to be further goes at her, I think she's going to go on to become a very powerful figure in the world. Okay, and yes, it's true, people like Gordon Brown have started to use her story for their own ends, which is a bit of a shame, but I think she is not the kind of person that's easily going to be swayed by anybody else's agenda, and thank goodness for that. So these are the kind of issues that we are now seeing that we have to deal with. One of the new era issues is going to be, dealing with things like slavery, women's issues, racial issues. They've all been bubbling along for ages. Now they've got to be dealt with, seriously dealt with. And you will have seen recently in America, of course, this has bubbled up with this rather unfortunate case where George Zimmerman over here, kind of street vigilante, I suppose, shoots dead Trayvon Martin, who was unarmed. Now, Trayvon Martin is no saint. Let's be clear about this. But nonetheless, he was shot dead when he actually wasn't armed at all. So this, of course, raises issues because, as everyone said, if this had been the other way around and a black man shot the white man, I think we all know what the verdict would have been because, of course, Zimmerman has been acquitted. But it's raised serious issues about not only the racial divides that still need sorting out, despite the fact we've got Obama as president, and we won't go into the conspiracy view, but he still represents a big shift. There are a lot of difficulties that need to be dealt with. But then the other big one, not here, but in America, is gun control. And the idea of controlling guns, this is something that is seen as very dangerous by those who believe it is such a crucial part of their freedom, written into the American Constitution, that you can't take them away. And yet, we all know the dangers of everybody having guns at the same time. And I think there is a very real danger of a new American Civil War. And let's hope this doesn't happen, but there's certainly a lot of weapons there. So race is an issue. And, another connection with race and America, of course, came about after the Boston bombings. Now, I want to say something about this, because there is everybody running, having a perfectly normal day, and then in the way of terrorist attacks, bang! And suddenly people are dead, and suddenly it turns to a scene of horror. Now, of course, the two men who've been blamed, one now dead, are Muslims from the ex-southern Russian states. And there's a lot of strangeness around this case. There's a lot of accusations that this is a false flag attack. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of what's really happened, but I do accept there are some strange aspects. But we've got to be very careful here. Because the alternative world, and particularly the conspiracy world, feels that it's constantly under attack, it tends to attack back the other way in a very extreme way. And there's a lot of theories going around that this was a setup, that it didn't really happen, that the explosion was a flash bomb and nothing more, and that all the people lying on the pavement with blood all over them, in fact, were actors who then all laid down and basically threw ketchup all over them. This is a widely held belief in some quarters of the conspiracy world. Now, okay, here I want to say something very important. The first thing is, now I come from Lewes in East Sussex. It's seen as the bonfire night capital of the world, okay? Once home to Thomas Paine, but also it's the biggest Guy Fawkes celebrations. They let the biggest bangers off you've ever known. You want to know what fireworks are? You go to Lewes. And they have little things that big, and when one goes off, even over where that camera is there, bloody hell, it flaps your trousers and you are deaf. Don't tell me that a blast that big didn't affect people, because it did. Even a flash bomb is going to affect people. So I don't accept the notion that nothing happened. Now, it's possible there is a false flag story behind it. That's another issue. But this denial, it didn't happen, comes in now a lot. The Sandy Hook school shooting. There are some saying it didn't happen. Even the children were actors. Now, we got to be careful because, of course, that opens us up to severe ridicule from the outside. Again, I accept there are unknown things about the Sandy Hook shootings. There are claims there was another gunman. And we don't know the ins and outs of how that's going to resolve. But then to go to the other extreme and say, well, in fact, I'm going to say it never even happened, that's a dangerous policy unless you've got absolute evidence to prove that. The new era means discernment. And on our own streets, we had this a few weeks ago, months ago. The Woolwich killing, where Lee Rigby, the soldier, found himself suddenly attacked and killed by these two men. It has a lot of strange things about it, there's no denying. And it's very odd, so they killed him. Now, it's claimed they attempted to behead him. There's no evidence of that from the pictures, very little blood, but that's, again, another story. But it was very odd, so instead of running away, they stood there, chatted to people on the street and talked to the cameras. Now, what's going on here? Were they just being martyrs? Were they making a point? Or were, as some have said, they mind-controlled? But guess what? Again, there's a big faction saying, no, they were all actors, including Lee Rigby. All actors. Now, if you're going to say the whole thing was an act, right, you've got to say that poor old Lee Rigby and his mum and the family, crying their eyes out, as of course you would on the TV, are all actors. Bloody hell, they're the best actors ever, and Mike Leigh should hire them immediately, right? This doesn't make sense to me. Because in the next breath, this faction of people that say they were all actors, right, will then say, and they killed 3,000 people on 9/11. Which makes me think, well, hang on then. So if they killed 3,000 people on 9/11, why would they not worry about just killing one more person on the streets of London? Why would they worry about killing 6 people on the streets of Boston? Wouldn't it just be easier to do it? If you had to hire them all as actors, it's going to come out, isn't it? Because it means everybody who went to the funeral were also acting. And the little boy, his son, was an actor. This is madness to my eyes. That doesn't mean there aren't problems with the official story. I think there are some. I don't think we've been told the whole truth about what's gone on. But I think we need to be very careful when we start getting so extreme. You can only say things like that if you've got absolute evidence, and then let's hear it. But at the moment, I don't see it. And I worry that this isn't in itself a plant to discredit conspiracy theories. Because that's what it does on the outside. Because people hear that and they say, this is just total madness. And the thing is, when people feel something's really going on, they feel it in their collective gut. I thought we had to mention this man, and by default this lady, because it's exactly 10 years ago this summer that, of course, David Kelly died. And I don't think there's many people left who believe he committed suicide. The evidence is very against it. And we won't go into the odds and ends of all of that. But here's the thing. Inquest after inquest says that Kelly and Princess Diana, because there's a very similar response from the public. Inquest after inquest says, no, his was a suicide, hers was just an accident with a drunken driver. And nobody believes it. or 10%. The average poll ratings for what people believe about these things fall somewhere in the region of about 90% of people believe they were murdered. Okay, so we actually do know collectively when something's going on. And I think you can read that. Now, it doesn't mean you're right about everything you feel there necessarily, but when everybody feels it, that intuition, that intuitive sense is something we need to take seriously. Because I think one of the things about the new era and the rising energies and the rising consciousness is we will, I think, be able to trust our feeling, our collective feeling a little bit more. And I think that's why, for instance, there's a lot of very uncomfortable feelings about what's going on in Syria. What's going on there, obviously, is dark and terrible and one of the worst civil wars we've had in the world for a long time. But there is certainly evidence of Western interference here. Now, we're arguing in the news about should we give weapons to the rebels, whoever the hell the rebels are. It's all, I think, very murky, and I suspect we need to see more clearly what's going on before we give arms to anybody. But here's the thing, you see, the truth would seem to be, in fact, we've been there probably arming them for ages. That turned out to be true in Libya, for instance. Turned out the SAS had been in Libya months before we officially sent anybody in there. And it would seem it's the same in Syria. It was a very interesting quote just a few weeks ago from this man here. This is the ex-French foreign minister, Roland Dumas. And he managed to give something away, very interestingly, in a TV interview. And he was chatting away and talking about Syria. And he said this. He said, I was in Britain 2 years ago, and I met British officials, some of my friends. They admitted that they were up to something in Syria. This was weeks ago he said this. So it's very obvious our, at least intelligence services, if not military, are already abroad in Syria. So what's going on there, I think we are beginning to see strings being pulled. Now, what is going on here? Are we trying to conflagrate this into something bigger? Are we just protecting our own interests? And I think this also comes into play with what's going on in Egypt. I mean, the whole thing around Egypt has gone very strange, hasn't it? Because everybody celebrated when the people appeared to free themselves a couple of years back. But now, the world's governments, at least, are cheering on a military coup. Okay, so they did actually get a democratically elected government, but it wasn't the right kind of democratically elected government. So everybody's saying, jolly good. It's good that the military went in and got rid of them. Now, listen. I think there are severe issues with the Muslim Brotherhood, to be sure, but they were elected. And if they wanted to get rid of them, one might have hoped they could have found a more legal way to get rid of them. But no, and instead we get the marvelous laser light shows. I'm always very impressed by the laser lights in the squares. But anyway, and this is a classic, you get the ultimate hypocrisy of the Western world, delivered to you by people like this. It's horrible, isn't it? Contemplate that for a moment. So Tony Blair, who is the Middle Eastern peace envoy, the irony of this seems lost on many people. Anyway, there we are. So he has defended the military coup big time, and he said, well, and this is the classic, if you didn't hear this, he said, how can you possibly ignore the wishes of millions on the streets? Remember this? So funnily enough, back in 2003, he managed to do exactly that. But now he's saying, when that many people express their feelings, you must act. Yeah, well, so there's hypocrisy written big. By the way, just a brief anecdote. Some years ago, I met a lady who was a retired nurse, and she had to go to Downing Street to receive a medal from Tony Blair. And she'd seen me give a talk, and she just came up afterwards. She said, look, I had no feelings one way or the other about Tony Blair. But when the moment came, when he gave me the medal, she said, I felt a shiver go through me. She said, there was nothing behind the eyes. Total coldness, no humanity there. Now, whether this means he's a reptilian is another matter altogether. But he certainly sold out some of his humanity, and you can really see that when you see us on the telly these days. So, anyway... And it just reminds me of this old poster. Do you remember this? It really now makes you wonder, doesn't it? This was when New Labour were about to come to power, but the opposition had this, the demon eyes. But now you wonder if somebody didn't know something. Actually, I think this was designed by Charles Saatchi, funnily enough. He's in his own trouble, of course, now. Anyway. But one important thing to say. some years ago, not many years ago, and there's a little book out there called A Oneness of Mind. You can read the transcript of it. I gave a talk called World War III and Other Non-Events. Because back after 9/11, there was a lot of people saying, this is World War III. It's the beginning of World War III. Oh, my God. And I'm hearing it again. And it's boring and it's depressing. Because when everybody starts saying, oh, this is World War III in Syria and Egypt, what's going to happen? It's World War III. The New World Order are organizing World War III so they can wipe out the Muslims and the Jews all in one go and then rule. Now, listen. I think there is evidence that these Middle Eastern conflicts are being manipulated. But World War III, that's got a big connotation. World wars are big and complex things. If we all go into the energy of thinking World War III, we're giving them what they want. Don't do it. Yes, there are serious issues. We need to, again, discern and really be there for it. But don't go around saying, oh, it's World War III. I see too many things going around on the net about this. You're giving it the energy. You're creating a negative energy of World War III. Don't. Let it be what it's going to be. Campaign where you can for peace. Say what you want to say. But don't make it something it isn't yet, because it isn't World War III. And it may well never come to anything like that, even though it is dubious. So a note of caution there that I just wanted to mention. But then we kind of contradict ourselves very often in the alternative world anyway, because why do we even need World War III? Because others say we're all mind controlled all the time anyway. This is the HARP project, which you've all heard about, I expect. This is one of the big stations based in Alaska. Now, it's currently offline. Now, the official take on it is that this is no longer functioning because they've run out of money. Although DARPA, which is the big American defense division, is saying, well, we might use the facilities for our own experiments, whatever they may be. If you don't know what HARP is, it was initially claimed to be an attempt to rock the ionosphere, to use military communications without having to have satellites. But they have also learned to create natural auroras, well, not natural, unnatural auroras by zapping the ionosphere. It is clearly capable of great things. But of course, because we can see it's capable of great things, a lot of people think it's also capable of weather wars. And there's a lot of worry that HARP is being used to create volcanoes and tsunamis and earthquakes. And it might be the case. It certainly has capabilities. But again, I want to sort of say something about fear. If we go into the new era with just fear, we run the risk of actually making more of this. I don't know if HARP is used as much as people think it is. I mean, now, you see people blaming HARP for everything. The toaster's gone cold, it's HARP. We've got to strike a balance, Yes, it's capable of perhaps dodgy things, but let's not go over the top here. So, you will get natural disasters. It doesn't mean it's HARP. It could be HARP, but then, why engineer World War III if you could just do this around the world anyway? And of course, the other big issue we've got is chemtrails. I think it is a serious issue that needs serious addressing. At the same time, I will introduce, in the way of things, a note of moderation. I don't believe there are as many created chemtrails as some people believe. But at the same time, it is clear they do seed the atmosphere with things. They do, it's official, throw things into the atmosphere for strange designs of their own. Now, however many you believe are artificial and natural, if you want to call them that, nonetheless, you've got to make a decision. Are they trying to poison the population? Are they trying to kill us all? Is it a suppressant? Or, as many people believe, is it a kind of form of climate control? Well, the answer is we don't know. But certainly, to my mind, if this was every trail you ever saw was a chemtrail, by golly, that's the biggest conspiracy ever. How would you keep that a secret with so many pilots? I think there'd be more whistleblowers if every single trail was a chemtrail in that sense of the word. So we need to moderate. I definitely think that we need to investigate, because the fact is, when you have so many people, as they do now feel, thinking they're under attack every day, that's a very wrong state of affairs. Right? If the governments of the world don't like conspiracy theories, and in the Conspiracies book I write about this, they better start addressing some of the unexplained phenomena that they are not addressing. There needs to be a serious investigation into this because there's too many people waking up every day and feeling miserable because they're seeing trails in the sky. To not address that is to basically not be interested in the needs at all of the population. A lot of people feel this is important, so let's get it investigated at least. So those people who are writing to your MPs and getting ridiculous letters back saying, don't waste my time with this rubbish, we'll keep writing. Because let's find out the truth. But, what I would argue here is, though, that you don't even need any of these things. Let's say chemtrails weren't chemtrails. Let's say HAARP only does what they say it does. Let's say all that's true. You've got other, far more serious issues. There are satellites floating over our heads today that we have no idea what they're doing. They could be zapping us with anything. And we don't really think about that. If you go out at night, see how many satellites you can see. And some people don't realize you can see them. It's like little points of light going across. And then you will learn that I think around 80% of satellites are military and we don't know their purpose. Isn't that amazing? And then you start to read the words of people like this man here. There's a big new Brzezinski, who is the power behind the throne of the Obama government. By the way, he created Al-Qaeda many years ago. He armed the insurgents in Afghanistan, and they are now Al-Qaeda, whatever that may be. But he wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, which basically laid out all the plans of the New World Order unashamedly. And he says in that, what we need to do is to zap populations with waves, beams, because it would be a very good way of controlling them. And he sells this as a perfectly good and proper thing to do. And this man is basically running the Obama presidency behind the scenes. So it certainly occurred to them to do this, even if they are not yet doing it. So don't get too hooked up on things that may or may not be. This is real. There's a lot of satellites up there, and we simply don't know what they're doing. But on the other hand, we don't need them. We've been zapped anyway for years just through our normal mediums. And I love this picture. I don't know who did it, but credit to them. This is something that I think we tend to forget anyway. We're conditioned, we're brainwashed every day by what comes through the tube. And here's the thing, you can see this in action if you just focus. Here's a very, very good example. Right, Richard III. You all saw the fuss about digging up Richard III. I thought this was a very interesting one. Here is evidence of how an academic elite has got hold of the media and will not let any other theories get through. Philippa Langley, if you saw the initial program, she was very intuitive. She's just right for the new era. A little bit wacky, okay, but she said, I feel strongly the body of Richard III is here. And it was in a car park. And funnily enough, there was a big letter R painted on the car park. And she said, I feel this is where he is. And of course, all the academics said, rubbish, woman, you know what you're talking about. You're a nutter. And it is great. Watch the initial program because it does come across like carry-on archaeology. It's hilarious. But I also thought when I watched it, and I said at the time, I can't believe they're going to let this keep going out. And guess what? I was right. Because you can't have people going around saying, I intuited where he was, and I was right, because that goes against everything. So did you notice how within weeks, and I mean within 3 weeks, that initial program was completely re-edited. And instead of Philippa Langley, we got Dr. Joe Appleby. And suddenly, Philippa Langley was reduced to a few walk-on moments where they didn't let her talk, because, that would be pretty damning. And instead we got the academics saying all the serious academic things and none of this intuitive business, saying, we always knew he was there. And, other things. The academics have said, of course he wasn't a hunchback. That was propaganda. Now we know he was a hunchback. And, this went. And then there was other things as well, where the academics have said, of course, the paintings we have of him wouldn't look anything like him. They've depicted him in a certain way for propaganda purposes. So they take the skull and they do a reconstruction of the skull to show what he really looked like. And sure enough, he does look exactly like they said, more or less. So, although the academics have been proved wrong on just about everything they'd said, they've rewritten history. And all the programs now say, yes, we knew it would be like this. And there's not a mention of psychic intuition. That you can be sure. And yet, one of the things we need to do, I think, is to take the bull by the horns and really start to say, no, actually, these are the kinds of things that the new era needs. We are entering a new age. Not only do we have a new era, you've got the astrological ages. We're just about to go into the age of Aquarius. This could take hundreds of years to occur, but we know that when it does occur, big change comes. I mean, the changing of the last age was, of course, at the end of the age of Aries and into Pisces. And we had the Roman gods. And go back 2,000 years, you'd never think this could go. The Roman Empire, solid. The gods, everybody believed in them. Within 300, 400 years, gone. The age of Pisces came in, Christianity came in, Islam came in, and it was finished. And who believes in these gods anymore? We talk about them, but nobody believes in them. So big change can and will come. And a lot of the things that seem to be fixtures now may not be. It might take 200, 300 years' time, but you're going to see the biggest changes that you can possibly imagine. And the age of Aquarius, of course, as Helen will tell you, is very much about the age of technology. Okay, it has a more higher idealistic way. The technology is going to change our world. The new era will be not only about new consciousness, but we're going to have to discern how much we blend with technology. Because soon you can have eye implants with cameras in them. Okay, we are learning to have cybernetics that are so good that eventually androids will exist. And of course, immortality is coming around the corner like an express train. And then what? When nobody has to die. You think you've got depopulation problems now? But this isn't science fiction, it's really happening. And already you've got the Google glasses, so you can see the internet in glasses now. Now already, who is present these days? Everyone's walking around looking at their iPhones. They're not really present. When they've got the glasses on, they're just going to be like that. Because they're going to be networking around the world. Well, when you've got an implant where you can just see all this in your eye, in your brain, which will happen, they're developing it, we're not really going to be here anymore. Where here is will become kind of meaningless. These are huge changes. And yet, that is, of course, assuming that the technology doesn't get stopped in its tracks. We talked about the millennium bug, but did you know there's another one on the way? Because in 2038, we got a similar bug that a lot of people are saying could have a disastrous effect. I found this picture on the net, which kind of says it all. It represented an asteroid coming down to destroy the Earth. There's a bug in the system that in 2038 could, in theory, shut everything down again. So we're back to square one, aren't we? There's a man who claims to be a time traveler, who has posted up on the net, John Titor. He claims that he's from the future and he's seen the disaster that this caused. And this is a poster from a film somebody's made about him. But it's claimed by some people he really is a time traveler. And he says he had to come back to get one of these, believe it or not. The IBM 5100 series, because it contains something that can cure the bug. So here we are, same old, same old. They still come round. So, you haven't heard the end of big millennial prophecies. So listen, we know there could be big changes. Just because we're past 21st of December doesn't mean we're past all the things we've talked about before. The threat from the sun on electrics, but also the promise of the sun that could have a huge effect on revitalizing our evolution. Electromagnetic waves may be the very thing that leads to a form of ascension. It rewrites our DNA. We will have earth changes. This has not gone away just because we're now in the new era. No, it might mean we get more and more of them. These things are still with us. But what I want to say to start to wrap this up now is this. We, of course, focus very often on things that seem a bit ethereal, but what about the natural world? What about the world that we need to take care of? I have severe questions about man-made global warming and all of that, but that doesn't mean that I don't care about the environment. We're doing great damage. The acidification of oceans is a major problem. Pollution is a major problem. Have you noticed how few moths there are these days? We were saying that, in the old days, when you were kids, you see these big scary moths coming up at the window. Now, lucky to see any a week. It's been a few more in the last few weeks, but not many. This is a bad sign. Crickets. I don't hear crickets in the grass round our way anymore. You have to go out to fields to find them. You don't have them in the garden anymore. That didn't used to be the case. This is a bad sign. And it's nice that there are some crickets out there, but the problem is that we keep bloody well taking away their environment. It's all very well to say, well, we need to build, people need houses, but they keep wiping out the habitats. So there are practical things we're going to need to look at, or we are going to find there is an eco problem. And yet people keep saying, oh, it's man-made global warming doing this. Or could it be that we keep building over everything that grows? That's why there's no sparrows around our way anymore, because of the food chain. So, of course, you could have fracking instead, which will put everything right. But I think we know all about that. But at the same time, we reject solar projects, we reject wind farms, we don't want fracking. We need to make some serious decisions about what we can accept. And yet we do know there are techniques, energies. We've heard about these before. Tesla, Schauberger, there are people developing marvelous and wonderful things that could change all this, and yet it's suppressed. It is kept from us. There is no question about that. They buy up the rights, the big companies buy up the patents, and you never hear of them again. So, to close, maybe the world did end. Maybe it did end on 21st of December. And here's the thing, that it's not the end of everything, but it was the end of an era. I think there is no question about this. And I think the new era is going to bring many delights, promises, and nightmares. And the final image I'm going to show you is this. You may have seen this. It was taken a few weeks ago. The Cassini spacecraft going around Saturn. Every now and then it gets a window where the sun's not in the way and you can see the Earth. And that little dot there is the Earth from Saturn, that little blue dot. And on that day, when they knew the picture was being taken, lots of astronomers around the world stood and waved at Saturn. So although you can't see it, there's loads of people waving at Saturn there. This is all we have, though. This little blue dot, this is all we've got. One day, in the new era, we will make it to the stars. We will make it out there. I truly believe that. But the only way we're going to get to that stage is making the right decisions now. So just because we are in the new era, don't let it go. The decisions that are made now, the moral decisions, the discernment we use now will determine where everything goes. If you walk out of this building after this conference and then forget it and do nothing with it, we have failed in our intent. What we're trying to do this weekend is to throw lots of ideas at you that may stimulate you to go out and help make a difference. So please do it, because what we have is very precious, and really, that's all there is. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Andy Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you.